the same thing that's on the screen, though, so you might prefer to look on the screen. I don't know. As I hope you know, our 9 o'clock service started today, which is why the setup is a little different. And you're welcome to sit at the tables. You're also welcome to sit up here. If you only sit at the tables, we're going to be a long way away from each other, but that's okay. I want you to be comfortable, and I want you to feel welcome. Before we start, is there a volunteer who would be willing to run the microphone around the room so that people who are on the microphone, thank you, Jim. I'll give it to Jim. Appreciate that. Thank you. So today is one of those unusual days where we're kind of in between, right? Last week we needed to welcome Charles, our new associate rector and chaplain at St. Martin's. Next week is ministry fair, and that gave us a 1-week window. And so I thought it might be kind of good for us and beneficial for us and maybe fun for us, I'm not sure, to look at the issue of planned giving. We don't talk about planned giving that much, but it's really important, not only for our church, but it's important for us to be intentional about our end-of-life plans. And we'll talk more about that today, but just kind of felt like a good 1-week topic. Again, there are handouts by the coffee pot. Sit anywhere you would like, including up here in the chairs. But let's start by praying this prayer together. This is the prayer at the top of the handout. It's also at the top of the screen. It's from our prayer book. It's the collect for the stewardship of creation, but it works really well for a conversation about planned giving. Let's pray that prayer out loud together. O merciful Creator, your hand is open wide to satisfy the needs of every living creature. Make us always thankful for your loving providence, and grant that we, remembering the account that we must one day give, may be faithful stewards of your good gifts through Jesus Christ our Lord, who with you and the Holy Spirit lives and reigns, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Who would read that bit from Luke 12 for us, please? Jim will bring you the microphone and let you read it either from, there you go, right there next to you. Thank you, Susie.
Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?' So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God."
Thanks, Susie. So if you were in church last week we celebrated the Feast of the Transfiguration. The Feast of the Transfiguration is normally not a feast that we would celebrate on a Sunday. It comes on August the 6th, and whenever it's August the 6th, we would celebrate it. But there are rules about what feasts can be transferred to a Sunday, and the Transfiguration is allowed to be transferred with the bishop's permission and a good reason. And the reason we give is we need baptism. We need an extra day for baptism. So last Sunday, we transferred the Feast of the Transfiguration to Sunday, and what we lost was this gospel lesson. So last Sunday, if we had been in church and not had the Transfiguration, this is the story that we would have heard. And if you haven't been to church yet, I want you to have this in mind when you hear this Sunday's gospel lesson. Or if you've already been in church, this is what comes right before today's gospel lesson, but we kind of missed it last week. So we get a chance to look at it in this context, which is a special treat. I'm curious, what's the bee in Jesus' bonnet? This is not this is a scary parable, especially for those of us who care about retirement savings. What's the point? What's Jesus up to? What's he really up to? If you were to translate this parable in the 21st century context, what would it sound like? Who's got some insights they would share? What do you hear? What seems important to Jesus? And Jim will bring that microphone to you. Susie? Yep.
You can't take it with you.
You can't take it with you. Thanks. What else? Yeah, Dave, thank you.
I'm not quite sure, but there's something about just taking care of yourself, these sort of warning against.
Yeah.
Just storing up all your stuff isn't a helpful way to interact with people.
Yeah, Nicole.
I think there's something important too in the line, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Clark French, who's a priest in Philadelphia, he's married to Sally French, who's the Bishop of New Jersey, but he ministers in Philadelphia. He noted, and I can't remember which word it is, but there's a word in this gospel lesson, and it might be about the one that you draw us to, but y'all know the word gluttony, right? We know the word gluttony with food. There's a Greek word for money. Like it's gluttony for money, and it's in this text. And so in some ways beneath the this is not about prudent savings. This is not about make sure that you save for retirement so that your kids don't have to take care of you, right? Or whatever it is, right? That's not what he's mad at. There's something about the way about it, like what we've heard. There's something about the motivation of the person in the parable that Jesus takes issue with, right? When I was first, I think I'm going to guess it was year C. I'm not sure about that, but 1 year to the day after I was ordained and started working as a priest, my boss went on sabbatical, and so I got to preach 2 or 3 Sundays in a row, and like Luke, which is year C, Jesus is really hard on rich people. And I was in a congregation full of rich people, including me. And finally, one day, Helen Wells, an attorney, she goes, would you stop giving all of us estate planners a bad name? Because I gotta make a living here. Come on. Anyway, and I kind of had to temper my enthusiasm and my zealotry because I don't think Jesus is saying don't have a will, but he is inviting us to be faithful, right? He's inviting us to be faithful with our plans. Maybe this is a good question. What's the difference between faithful estate planning and faithless estate planning? What does that look like? What are some characteristics that you would use to describe faithful estate planning versus faithless estate planning? What does that look like? I don't have an answer in mind, so just dream with me a little bit. Like what are some of the hallmarks of faithful estate planning? What does that look like? Yeah, Kathy.
I don't think it, for me, it doesn't have to do with any dollar amount because among people, there's a whole lot of a lot of differences. But I'm inspired by some key financial people these days who say, my children only need X amount.
Yeah.
And the rest of it is going to good of some kind.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if that's faithful to the Christian faith or not, but it is an example of simply choosing to determine
Yes.
that.
Yes, and I think it depends on what you mean by good, right? If you want to build a giant statue of yourself in the town square, probably not in that way. But if by good we mean the values that I hold dear in my faithful life get reflected in my faithful death, then sure, of course, right? Yeah. And the secret is it doesn't matter whether you're giving to your church or to community meals or to Seven Hills or to the United Way or to anything. Like, are you using your resources to do God's work in the world, however you define it? Yeah, yeah. What else does faithful estate planning look like? Faithful estate planning. Up front, Martha. Yep, thank you.
For me, I think it's a lack of worry. You don't have to worry about things. You can live for today.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yes. This comes right in the midst of do not be anxious about what you will eat or what you will wear. It's funny, in fact, like right after this, Jesus says, do not be anxious. In some ways, the man has done the opposite, though. Like, so the man's problem is like, oh, look, I can take it easy. Like, I've got more than enough. I can rest. But I don't think the antidote to the man's mistake is to be anxious. I think you're right. I think there's a difference between being anxious and also being arrogant or cocky or self-assured rather than God-assured, right? Yeah, I want to join you with that. Leah, do not give up on planning in a way that allows you and your family to get anxious. Like if your children are saying to you, Mom, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Like you probably need to think about it for their sake. Like, yeah, don't worry, I've got it. I've taken, like, help relieve anxiety and worry. Absolutely. Yeah. What else does faithful estate planning look like? Yeah, Dean.
I think it all comes down to motives, because I've seen certain planning where you are trying to force your will
Yeah.
post
Yeah.
you being gone, whereas it's not a gift, it is
Yeah.
further control.
Yeah. From the grave, right? And some of you have experienced that firsthand or maybe secondhand, and you know people whose loved one has died, and the ones they have left behind are shackled by their demands, their wishes, even after they're gone. They were shackled in this life, and they're shackled after it's over, right? Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the reasons when we do funeral planning, we want you to relax that it's taken care of, but we also want you to remember that your family is going to take care of it. We want you to give your family permission, because if you say, I want my Aunt Betty to read the first lesson at the funeral, if she is bedridden, you're gonna burden her by saying, you better be there or I'm gonna haunt you from the grave, right? So it's true with funeral planning, it's also true with estate planning, right? We want to be gracious. We want to be gracious. All right, we don't have to really answer what is faithless estate planning, because I think we can anticipate that. We see it in the gospel lesson, we see it in the lives of those around us. Let me read this prayer. This is one of my, clergy love this trivia question. I've asked it before. I'm sure Charles got it in seminary a lot. This instruction, it's in italics, it's in rubric, it's in the prayer book. If you get to church and you open your prayer book to page 445, you will read, it says, the minister of the congregation, that's me, the minister of the congregation is directed to instruct the people, that's you, from time to time about the duty of Christian parents to make prudent provision for the well-being of their families and of all persons to make wills while they are in health, arranging for the disposal of their temporal goods, not neglecting, if they are able, to leave bequests for religious and charitable uses. There are lots of things there, lots of things. The first thing is take care of your family. Take care of your family. That's where, you can't be faithful to God if you are neglecting your family. No one who asks you to give from your estate is asking you to put them before your family. Everybody who ever asks you to include them in your estate plans is assuming, trusting that you are taking care of your family. Because honestly, we don't want to deal with your children or your spouse or your loved ones if you've neglected them to the church's benefit. They're not going to leave me alone, right? I don't want to deal with that. So take care of your family. That's first. Take care of your family, right? Whether you have a family or not, whether you have children or not, get a will. If you don't write a will, the state will write one for you. And I promise you do not want the state of Arkansas to write your will. If you die without a will, there are rules for how it happens, and no matter how much everyone who loves you is in agreement about what to do, the state takes over, right? And I don't know this is true in Arkansas, but it's definitely true in Alabama. In Alabama, if you don't have a will, your next of kin becomes the executor, and then your next of kin has to put up a bond to make sure that they do this right. The first thing in all Alabama wills is they don't need a bond. But if you don't have a bond, the judge is going to say, pony it up, because we got to make sure you do it right. Like, if you don't have a will, even if you have nothing, hardly anything, if you don't have a will, it's a burden to your family. Get a will. Get a will. Find a legal professional who can help you find a will. That's the second thing I see, right? Take care of your family, have a will, and make sure that you've planned to dispose of your temporal goods, if you're able, to benefit religious and other charitable institutions. Not just religious institutions, other charitable institutions. Right? The church does not have a monopoly on good in the world. Let me say that again. The church does not have a monopoly on good in the world. It is true in your annual giving. It is true in your estate planning. It is true when you respond to requests for special giving. Our public radio station needs our funding. It's a good thing. I think it's good for us to give to our public radio station, right? The church does not have a monopoly on good in the world. Find the place where the good that is happening matters to you and give yourself to it. And don't wait until you're dead to give yourself to it. Give yourself to it now. Life's too short and there's too much need in the world for us to neglect those things. So I think it's interesting that the prayer book does this. Here's the trivia question. Does anybody know where in the prayer book, other than Charles, where in the prayer book page 445 is? Anybody know what's going on in that page? Anybody guess? Who's got a guess? Who's got a guess? Yeah, I bet Dave's heard this trivia question
Is it
before.
related to the annual meeting?
No. Kathy?
Death or funerals?
Funerals?
Death or
No.
funerals?
Good guess. Good guess. Yep. Jonathan's got a guess.
Is it in the catechism?
Nope, not in the catechism. Nope, not in the annual giving of the church. Misha? No, not in marriage. Charles, you want to tell us? Give Charles the microphone. He's got the answer.
This was one of the 2 questions I got wrong on the rubrics exam in seminary. It is in the thanksgiving for birth or adoption of a child.
Yes. So right after marriage and before you get to confirmation, there's a little tiny service called Thanksgiving for the birth or adoption of a child, which in the old prayer book used to be called the churching of women, right? Because, menstrual impurity, 40 days later you got to go to church. Like, it's still a tradition in a lot of Christian households. We don't celebrate that part of the festival as much, but it's a jolly good thing to give thanks for a birth. And in these italicized words, page 445, after the service, there's a little bit, by the way, and it's tucked away. We never open that book page of the prayer book, but it's in there. I think it's really important because clergy talk a lot about annual giving. We talk a lot about what a lot of people call stewardship, annual giving, but we don't talk about this kind of giving very often, and I think it's really important for us to talk about. That's why we're talking about it today. All right, let me remind you, this is something you probably already know. In the church, we talk about 3 different kinds of financial stewardship. There are other types of stewardship: stewardship of creation, stewardship of your vote, stewardship of your voice, right? There are lots of other things that you need to be a good steward of. But when it comes to financial stewardship, we typically talk about 3 things. Ordinary, which is annual giving. We invite you to give the first 10% of your income to support God's work in the world, whether it's at St. Paul's, any other institution. Be in the habit of giving your first 10% away to support God's work in the world. I'll let you decide whether that's before taxes or after taxes, because the truth is, if you're giving that much away, your heart belongs to God. It's going to work out just fine. But ordinary giving, annual giving, it's what we do every year. Then there's extraordinary giving or special giving, which we do when we have a capital campaign. We're in the middle of kind of preparing to launch the public part of a capital campaign. We know that roofs need attention, that elevators need attention, that handicap accessibility throughout the building needs attention. We know that when we purchased the Bassett building for ministry, we did so at a time during COVID when we weren't able to raise money to pay for it, but it was only going to be for sale for a short while, so the vestry decided to buy it. Now we got to pay for it, right? So there are special circumstances when we ask for gifts, usually out of assets. Some of us don't have any assets, so we just give a little more out of income, but those of us who have assets typically are asked to give to a capital campaign out of assets. Either you're selling your 6th car or you're selling some of your stock holdings, that kind of giving out of assets. It supports the specific need, building maintenance, purchase of new property, new opportunity like that. The third is what we're talking about today, planned giving, and it's what's often labeled ultimate giving. And ultimate, we don't mean like better than all the rest. We mean like it's the end. It's the last giving that you will do. And that's what we're going to focus on today. And typically we give from our estate, though I'll let you know that some of the ways that we give planned gifts are not through an estate. They go outside of the estate, and I'll say a little bit more about that. But when we give to a church through planned giving, we're not giving for today's budget. We're not giving for next year's budget. We're giving in a way that will support the long-term health and vitality and security of the congregation long after we are gone. So that even 100 years from now, we will still be benefiting from your estate gift as a part of what we do in our church. That's the way planned giving is. And people who are better at planned giving than I am will tell you that if you want your estate to reflect your values. Don't give it all to your children, who will love you. But if you expect your children to be a mirror image of your values, you're setting them up for failure and frustration at you from the grave. Instead, if you want your values to be reflected, give it to a charity, because I promise that they will honor your wishes. We have to. Your children, not so much, but we will honor your wishes. So think about that. All right, so let me talk a little bit about types of planned gifts, and then I'll ask for questions. This is from the handout. We're now on the back side of the handout. All right, let me scroll up just so you can see them. I'm going to talk about 5 different types of planned gifts. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on numbers 4 and 5 because there's not a lot for me to say about them. But I will talk about the first 3 especially. Bequests. Typically what we think of when we think about planned giving, it's from your will. Right? If you have a will, whether you were intentional about it or not, your resources are going somewhere. And the bequest is how you designate where they go. You should talk to your attorney, your legal advisor about your will. And these are some different ways that you can use your will to support any charity, St. Paul's or another charity. One is a specific amount designation. I leave to the rector of vestry and leaders of St. Paul's Church X amount of money to be used in this particular way or to be used however they see fit, right? So a specific amount. $10,000, $100,000, $7, whatever. A percentage, I leave 10% of my estate. That's one way to do it, leave 10% of my estate. Another is a remainder designation. So I'm going to give $100,000 to this child, $100,000 to this child, $100,000 to this, and whatever's left, give it to the church, right? And a remainder designation. Sometimes, and this doesn't work as often with a church, but a contingency designation is, I'm going to leave it to my spouse. If my spouse has died, predeceased me, then I leave it to my children. If they have predeceased me, then I leave it to the church, right? So a contingency designation, which your attorney will help you have lots of different contingencies because we don't want the state making that decision. And sometimes your executor can make that decision if you've shared your values fully with them, but sometimes executors, even our children or our loved ones, our siblings, aren't really sure what we wanted, so it's always helpful to let them know. I skipped one, specific assets. So you might leave, just as you might leave your engagement ring to your oldest daughter, perhaps, or maybe you leave your Pokemon card collection to your grandchildren. You might choose to leave your boat to St. Paul's or your cabin at Beaver Lake to St. Paul's. I'll tell you that the first thing we're to do with it is sell it and use the money for ministry. Unless it's a really unusual circumstance, in which case we might be able to use it. If you plan on leaving us specific property and you would like us to do something with it besides sell it, would you please let us know? Because we don't want to disappoint your loved ones when we tell them that we can't use that cabin in Angel Fire, New Mexico. Because that's a long way to drive for a vestry retreat. But the money from that could feed a lot of hungry people. Right? So if you have specific plans, the more specific and narrow they are, the more important it is to talk to me, to the leaders of our endowment committee, planned giving committee, members of our vestry. Talk to them about your plans so that we can honor your plans. Let me tell another story. I've told the story before, and I'll tell it as long as I'm a priest. Louise Meadows, sweet Louise Meadows. She was a delightfully fiery older woman, very short, curly white hair, Louise Meadows. She was at the church where I worked in Montgomery. She would not tell anyone her age. No one. She fell and broke her hip in her apartment, and the paramedics came and said, date of birth? And she goes, mm-mm. And they laughed. They're like, no, come on, what's your date of birth? She's like, mm-mm. And she goes, well, we're not putting you in the ambulance until you tell us date of birth. And so she did like this. The paramedic had to get down on the floor, and she whispered it in her ear. Just a remarkable woman. Anyway, without telling anybody, she left a large sum of money to the church for seminarian education, which is very generous. They can't use it. They give it away to seminaries. I mean, they write checks to, every seminary in the Episcopal Church because, they got $50,000 a year that she has said, I want it used for seminarian education. If she had said to the rector or the planned giving committee or the endowment, I want to support seminary education. How can we do that? They would have said, oh, great. let's broaden that a little bit so that we can use it for that, but so that we're not just sort of sitting on this money that we can't use because you've made such a narrow designation. But we didn't ask, the church didn't ask, and she didn't ask. And so as a result, we've got a gift that is so narrowly defined that the church that she loved dearly, can't fully use it. They give it away, but there aren't enough seminarians to support that, right? So if you have an intention in mind, let us know what it is so that we can help shape your plan so that what you want, which is surely that this would be used by the church that you love, so we can use it in a way that you envision and not find ourselves telling stories about Louise Meadows 20 years after her death. Anyway, all right, so those are bequest gifts, all right? I'm going to keep going, and then I'll pause for questions. All right, so life income gifts. These are a little more complicated. At least they seem it at first, but they're really not that complicated at all. Let me tell you what a life income gift is. You give a one-time gift. It is irrevocable. You make the gift, and then you get income from that gift for the rest of your life or for the time that you determine. And whenever the time is over, either your death or the defined time is over, what's left goes to the charity that you have designated. So if in 2025 you give $100,000 to this charitable remainder trust, right? You get the tax benefit in this year. You or whoever you designate get some income from that for the rest of your life, and when you die, whatever's left goes to whoever you've designated it for. So it's a little more complicated, but it allows you to get the tax benefit in this time, now, and also benefit from the income for having already made the gift. Now, it's an irrevocable gift, so irrevocable. So once you make the gift, you can't change your mind, but that allows you to kind of play around with when you get the tax benefit and the income and how it works out. As you can guess, you need to ask a financial advisor to help with that. It's hard to sort of do that on your own. Most brokerage houses, Fidelity, Schwab, like if you Google it, they'll let you know how to do it. You can create it, right? And we can be the beneficiary of that. If you can't find a brokerage house to do it, the Episcopal Church Foundation does that, and St. Paul's can also put you in touch with somebody who can help you with that. But the three that I've listed here are charitable gift annuities. Almost all life income gifts are charitable gift annuities, where you give a certain amount of money and you get an annuity from it, right? And then they calculate the amount that you get from it in order that a certain amount will be left. And whatever's left over is what you get the tax benefit from, right? So that's kind of an annuity. A charitable remainder trust is a lot like that, but instead of an annuity, it's an investment trust. And again, the trustees have particular rules about how that it get invested, what you get the tax benefit from, and how much income passes. And the last is a pooled income fund, which is kind of declining in popularity. It's a little like a charitable remainder trust, but you don't get to decide where the sort of money goes year on year. And so it's a little broader of an instrument, and again, a little less popular. But there is something called a pooled income fund, where different donors give to the same fund, and then they benefit from it. But in other words, you're not defining your own fund, you're joining a fund that already exists. So those are life income gifts. Let me say a little bit about the next one, and then I'll pause for questions. This next group, which is I've labeled special asset gifts, almost all of these will pass outside of your estate. So you do need a will, but you don't need the will to do these things, right? So if you have a 401k, 403b, or an IRA, somewhere in some paperwork there's a beneficiary for it. And it's usually your spouse or your children, right? Well, you can define a charity as your beneficiary. So if you say, when I die, I want whatever's left in my IRA to go to St. Paul's Church, then before probate does anything, before your attorney does that, Schwab or whoever has your 403b or your IRA will write us a check. It just passes, just automatically. It's not a part of estate tax, just passes. The same is true for life insurance beneficiaries. If you make us the beneficiary of your whole life insurance policy because you and your family don't need the benefits for it, then we will be the beneficiary upon your death. You can certainly do that as well. Real estate, also, it's possible, depending on the nature of your will, you can designate that it passes this way outside of the will. If you make us sort of the survivor benefit, if you will. And other appreciated property is also possible to do that. Some of that will need an estate plan, like a will, and some of it will not. But sometimes we think only rich people get to give planned gifts. That's not true. Like, think about what it means to put on your designated beneficiary of your IRA. I want 50% to go to my family and 50% to go to my church. Like just that easily, that's a planned gift. That is making a planned gift. You don't get the tax benefit for it when you sign the piece of paper like you would with some of the other planned income gifts, but you do, of course, continue to get the benefit from your IRA until you die, in which case it then passes to your designated beneficiaries, whether it's half family, half the church, or the like. So that's some other instruments. I'll say a little bit more about the next two in a minute, but let me pause for a minute. That's a lot of information. I am not a financial advisor. I am not an attorney. I play one on TV. No, I don't even do that. So don't believe me. But my goal is to get you thinking about possibilities so that whether it's tomorrow or next year or 10 years from now, you're like, yeah, I remember hearing that it's possible for me to support my church, to support charities that matter to me, not only through my will, but through other instruments. So let me pause. Questions, hopefully that aren't too technical in nature because I don't have the answers to those. Questions or comments about this sort of planned giving? Yeah, Judy up front. Thank you. Here. Yeah, hold on a second. Here comes that microphone so we can all hear you. Thank you.
Under the life income gifts,
Yeah.
where it says in parentheses 90% of LIGs.
Yeah.
Would you repeat what that
Yeah,
means?
so like of those life income gifts, 90% of people give through the charitable gift annuities. It's the most popular form. It just means that line is the most popular of them. Just like of all the planned gifts, 80% of planned gifts are bequests. The other 20% is the other stuff. That data is a little outdated. This is from the Episcopal Church Foundation, maybe about 8 years ago, so it's probably changed. But as of 8 years ago, 80% was through bequests. The rest is below it, but among that subsection, life income gifts, most people give to charitable gift annuities because it's really easy. It's the one that you don't really have to, you don't have to set up a new trust. You just sort of pay into the annuity, you designate who gets the benefit of it, and they'll tell you how much you're going to get every month for the rest of your life, and it's kind of simple like that. I'm not sophisticated financially enough to know under what circumstances that would be financially advantageous. Like I don't know enough about finances to say, oh yes, if you have this much income and this is what's happening, then you should consider a life income gift. I don't know. I just know it's possible. I know how it works, but I don't know why it's good. Yeah. But I bet your tax advisor does, right? Yeah. Other questions about any of this so far? Yeah? What I want you to see is that it's possible. This is not strange. This is not something that only billionaires need to think about. This is stuff that we need to think about, right? And I also want you to hear, whenever someone asks about planned giving, they are not asking me to choose between my children and my church. We would never make that request. And nobody who's asking for your planned gift would make that request, all right? Let me talk about the last two. Donor advised funds are becoming much more popular. Donor advised funds are a way for you to make a gift and set up essentially your own foundation. And then every year you get to decide where do the benefits go, right? And so if you, you know the old joke about the person who was on a desert island and finally they come to rescue him and they're like, let me show you around. You know this joke? It's not funny. So anyway, don't get your hopes up. But this is where I slept and this is where I ate and this is the school and this is my church. And they say, well, what's that building over there? That's where I used to go to church. Right. So if you change your mind about the charities that you support, the church that you support, you can change your mind. The initiation of the donor advised fund is not revocable. You get the tax benefit this year by setting up this donor advised fund, but who gets the income every year is changeable, right? You get to decide, oh yeah, this year I want it to go to the United Way, and next year I want it to go to Seven Hills, right? So you get to do that. So it's a little more complicated, and the more variability there is, the more opportunities for changing there is, the more complicated it is to set up the instrument and the more important it is to have a financial advisor. But donor advised funds are more and more popular. Family trusts, community trusts, our foundations are a little like that. And the last one is a charitable lead trust. A charitable lead trust is the opposite of a charitable remainder trust. So a charitable remainder trust is, I'm going to give some money, I'm going to use the income for now, and then the money goes to a charity when I'm done. A charitable lead trust is, I'm going to give you the money now, and when it's over, I get the money back. And so it's just the opposite. Again, it's not all that popular, but for certain tax advantages, it might be helpful. But the charitable lead trust, instead of the institution getting at the end, the individual gets it back. But basically, you're giving up the income from your holdings for the next 10 years in order to support them, but 10 years from now, you're going to get it back. Again, I don't know under what circumstances that would be advantageous tax-wise, but it is out there, and so I wanted to mention it. So those are the different kinds of planned gifts. Any questions about any of those? Any questions? Hopefully not too technical. All right? Let's talk about how St. Paul uses estate plans. Yep. So hopefully you are familiar with this. So we have an endowment. Our endowment is somewhere between $4 and $5 million right now, but the market's pretty volatile, so if you ask me in a couple of months, I'm not sure. But the benefit of the way that we invest and the way that we pull money from it is that we're designed to weather the ups and downs of the market. We use Greenwood Gearhart, local firm. One of the founders was a member of our parish. But we use Greenwood Gearhart. They meet with us several times a year in order to make sure that our investment strategy reflects not only our need for income, but also the values of the church. We do not invest in fossil fuel companies. We don't invest in weapons companies. We don't invest in private prisons. We don't invest in tobacco stocks. So there are ways that we want our investments as a church to reflect our values as a church, and Greenwood Gearhart is good to work with us in those ways. The endowment committee, those 5 names, those are people that are appointed by the vestry to serve a 5-year term. They're staggered terms. And those are people with gifts for finance, but also gifts for ministry. It's not helpful if the only people in the room are financial analysts. We need people who get that these investments are about values and about money, about programs behind the money. And the other thing I'd say is the way that we have those invested is that we withdraw. Currently, our draw is 5% of the value of the funds on a 3-year rolling average. So if this year's a really good year in terms of the market, then the money will pull out as more, but it won't be that much more, so that we can weather the ups and the downs. About 10% of our church's operating budget every year comes from the endowment, 10%. I wonder if that sounds high or low to you. A lot of churches are 30% or 40%, 10%. 10% of our operating budget. So it's significant, but it's not a replacement for our annual giving. Annual giving is the principal way that we do ministry in this place, not only in terms of the finances, but also our participation. 10% of our annual budget, more or less, comes from the endowment, and we pull 5% from these funds, and we use it based on what the donors have in mind. McMichael, named for Tippy McMichael, one of the largest bequests that we have received, unrestricted. It goes in part to fund the Tippy McMichael lecture series, but it also goes to fund anything. It comes into the budget, and the vestry spends it however the vestry feels is most helpful for ministry. It just comes into the budget that way. Greg Shively, named for 2 families, is for local outreach. So the money that we will spend on local outreach this year will at least be what we receive from the Greg Shively Endowed Fund, right? The Reynolds-Murphy Fund is set aside for music and for historic properties, but the Reynolds-Murphy Fund is not one that we draw from. We do not take a withdrawal from that. We are still accumulating assets in order that when it's time for us to do big work on our properties, that fund will be available to us. So we do not take 5% for that, but it is in our endowment for the eventual use of either a big investment in music or a big investment in our historic properties. The Rigsby Fund is our newest fund. It was established not that long ago from an estate gift from Liz Howick. Liz Howick did not put any restrictions on her estate gift, but music was one of her favorite things at this church, and so the vestry thought it made sense for us to have a fund dedicated to music, because we didn't have a music-dedicated fund, and that it would be appropriate for us to name that in honor of Charlie Rigsby, our longtime organist and choir master. He was touched by that gift, but every year, 5% of whatever that is goes to support music in this place. And the last named fund is the Eggleston Fund, named in memory of India Eggleston, a member of our youth group who died a few years ago, and we use the income for that to send our campers, our youth, to Camp Mitchell. We also use it for other youth programs. So that's what those are for. If you leave an estate gift to St. Paul's, it will probably end up in one of those. And if you leave it unrestricted, we're going to put it in McMichael. If you want it for local outreach, we're going to put it in Greg Shively. If you want to do something that is not reflected on that list, let's talk about it. And if you want to give us a lot of money to do that, enough that we would add a 7th, 6th, 7th, or 8th endowment fund, let's do it. But we don't need 2 music funds. We really only need 1 dedicated music fund. And so as a result, if you want to give to music, just indicate music, and we will give your estate gift to the Rigsby Fund, and we'll make sure that the proceeds from that will always go to support music at St. Paul's. If there's ever a time when we don't do music at St. Paul's, it'll be up to the vestry to figure out how best to use your gift, but can you imagine not doing music at St. Paul's, right? There's a reason that these things are as broad as they are, because they're fundamental expressions of who we are and how we carry on our life together. So think about how that gift, how your gift might be used. It doesn't have to be an endowed gift, right? You might say, if you leave a lot of money and you want to support paying off debt or contribute to the capital campaign or something else, we can receive that. We'd love to talk about it before you made that gift. We just think about all the Louise Meadows stories, right? It's kind of funny to think about the way that somebody might narrow a gift that we can't really use. So we don't want that to happen. So we do want to talk about that. But it's certainly possible that your planned gift, your estate gift, would not go into the endowment if you had a particular purpose for it. But our assumption is that if you leave something to St. Paul's, that we're going to include it in our endowment. Because as you can tell, if we pull 5% from every year, that means we expect that to happen in perpetuity, right? We're not going to use 100% of your gift for this year's budget. We're going to use whatever you give. We're going to use 5% of it every year in order to do whatever it is that we're doing as a parish. And again, if you have other desires or plans, or you just want to know more, let me know. Let any member of our endowment committee know. I don't have the names of the planned giving committee up, but I'll say more about that in a minute. Let any member of our planned giving committee know as well. Questions about any of that? Comments about how St. Paul's uses your planned gifts for the long-term future of our church? Thoughts about that? Yeah? There's a beautiful tension, it's not really a check and a balance, but these 2 different groups have different roles. There's the endowment committee and the vestry. The endowment committee's job is to invest the funds, make them available to the church to spend them in accordance with the donor's wishes. It's the vestry's job to then spend it in accordance with the donor's wishes. So the endowment committee gets to decide how much we invest in stocks and bonds, and they get to tell us how much we're going to draw. And the vestry gets to say, well, we're going to spend this on this kind of music or this kind of outreach. And so the vestry, sometimes vestries want more than endowment committees are willing to give, because it's always fun to spend money. But the endowment committee's job is to preserve our endowment for the long-term future and vitality of our church. So the endowment committee is, oh no, we've got to save. And the vestry is, but we don't want to just save for ourselves, we want to spend. So that's a beautiful thing, because sitting on a war chest is not faithful. That's the parable, right? But at the same time, spending it all on a fad is not faithful either. And so those 2 groups kind of embody that relationship between long-term future and spending it where it's most needed. Dave?
Yeah, so I was the treasurer here for several years, and before we had the endowment committee, the vestry meetings were sometimes complicated because nobody got on the vestry because they were great at understanding the stock market or something like that. And so we had sort of a rubber stamp meeting every once in a while, like, yeah, everything in the endowment looks good. And so one of Evan's requirements was to set up this endowment committee of people who are focused on that. And they meet several times a year, and it's really been very helpful to have people focused on tracking the investments and meeting with Greenwood Gerhardt to go through everything, and just making sure that that things are being managed correctly, and then have a separate body who says, yeah, this is what we're going to spend it on now that it's been managed. But having those 2 try to be the same thing was very complicated for the vestry.
Yeah, thank you. I think it gives St. Paul's confidence that the vestry is going to spend your money well, and the endowment committee is going to invest it well and decide how much can be spent. right? I want your descendants 100 years from now to be able to say, look, my great-great-grandmother's gift is still being used to honor who she was and the church that she loved. None of us can anticipate how that's going to be used 100 years from now. What organization the check might be written to, what staff member might fill that role, what ministry might use it. But we want to be able to say today that 100 years from now, that gift is going to support music in this place. Beautiful music. Music that glorifies God and reflects who we are as a community, or outreach, or properties, or youth, or, right, yeah. Other reflections about this. So the thing I want to invite you to do, it's a goal. I think it's a long-term goal, is to endow your pledge. Like, just think about how much you're able to give to the church every year. Just think about it. If you give to St. Paul's in your estate 20 times your annual gift, we will forever be able to use your annual gift. So if your annual gift is $10,000 a year, and you leave us $200,000, 5% of that is $10,000. So in theory, as long as the markets don't do something crazy, and as long as we continue to draw 5%, we're going to be able to have your $10,000 commitment every year as if you were still with us. The average pledge at St. Paul's is a little over $4,000. Many of you give a lot more than that. And if the average pledge is $4,000 and the newcomers who are coming aren't even at the average pledge, because when you're first starting working, if you give $1,000, that's significant, right? Some of you, if you were no longer able to make your commitment, if you don't endow your pledge, we're not just losing one pledge, we're using eight average pledges. We got to grow a lot to make up for some of your commitment. So if whatever your pledge is, big or small, just think, if I'm going to make a planned gift to my church, to other organizations as well, think about where you support every year, and think about making an estate plan that allows your support, not just to your church, but to the other charities that you value, allows your support to continue after your death. And for the most part, 20 times your annual pledge is what you have to give in order for that to be made up. In order for the vestry not to be saying, what are we going to do now? Because so-and-so who gave us a whole lot of money every year has died, didn't include us in our will. We're going to have to cut. We don't want your death to be a reason the church's ministries shrink. We want the ministries of the church to continue as you know it and love it. And one of the ways you can do that is by endowing your pledge. There are other ways to give as well, but just as a target, just a general target, think about endowing your pledge. No matter how big or small it is, just think about endowing your pledge 20 times, leave that gift. And of course, if you restrict it, that's okay. If what it takes for you to feel really excited about giving that legacy gift is to name a particular ministry, great, we will do that. We will honor it and we will celebrate it. Annual giving isn't restricted, right? Annual giving goes wherever the vestry feels it needs to go. So if you're able to not restrict your estate gift, that helps the vestry use your funds in whatever your gift in whatever way the vestry feels is right. This year it might be more children. Next year it might be more outreach. The year after that it might be more music. We don't know what'll come, but I trust our vestry, I trust our parish to know how best to use that. So just think about that. Again, if there's any takeaway, this is not a conversation for billionaires. It's a conversation for all of us. All of us need to have a will, or else the state of Arkansas will write one for us. If you're able to endow your pledge, that's wonderful. And don't just think about that at St. Paul's. Think about all the organizations and agencies, all of the work in this community and around the world that you consider important to you. Make sure that with your plans, you are able to reflect those same values in your death as you have reflected in your life. That's a legacy that you can pass on, not only to your church, but also to your family. And finally, we would never ask you to choose between your children and your church, between your family and these organizations. We want you to be able to honor and care for your family first, and after that, to consider how you also might care about those organizations that you hold dear. I've got a couple of really thick handouts. I made about 15 copies of them. It goes into a little more detail about these planned giving instruments. On my way out, I'm going to leave them by the coffee pot. And please take one if you would like. This is available online. There's other stuff available online. So if you want to know more, just send me an email. The last thing I want to say is we have a planned giving committee at St. Paul's, a planned giving committee who is about the work of reminding people of the importance of planned giving. Bill Clark has been the chair of that for a number of years. He has given up the chair role. He's had enough. But we are looking for a new chair of our planned giving committee. If this is the kind of thing that you like, if you find yourself thinking, I get intuitively the importance of planned giving, you might be the right person to do that work. Let me know, or let any member of our vestry know. But I'm glad y'all are here. Next week, ministry fair, and I hope you'll be here. Thanks.